Laura, so glad to have you with us. Thanks for coming, as it were. Why are you not here?
Actually, thank you so much for having me. I want to thank Gavin especially. I'm really sad I can't be there with you guys. The reason, which I've said before, is, upon legal advice that traveling to the UK might pose some risks because of what's happened with the reporting on the GCHQ and the UK Terrorism Act and Official Secrets Act and all that kind of stuff. So it's just upon legal advice that I've been told not to travel to the UK. The last time I was in the UK, I was filming at the Guardian offices when they were publishing the Tempora story. And that was before they destroyed their hard drives and source material. And since then, I haven't been back. So I'm sad I can't be with you.
So now the UK is more of a nervous-making place to be than the US?
Yeah, it is. I mean, which isn't to say that the U.S. doesn't also make me nervous. I mean, I've personally been on a watch list for many years and stopped every time I've crossed the border. But the First Amendment does give certain protections, and that you don't have in the UK. And so it does feel like it's a safer place for me to travel right now. So yeah, that's the context why I'm not there today.
All right, good.
So I was going to maybe just go into a few details about how this story unfolded that may be relevant to the conference and these questions of journalism and surveillance and how they come together. I was going to talk about that from two perspectives. One is how I communicated with Snowden for the 5 months before we actually met in Hong Kong, and then maybe we can go into some of the questions about working with the press. But I think since there are many journalists there, I thought that might be useful. So we corresponded for over the course of 5 months, and it was using GPG email with anonymous accounts and over the Tails operating system. And the first contact I had, he'd reached out to me. Snowden reached out anonymously to a mutual friend, Michael Lee, requesting my public key, and I gave it to him. And at that point, he contacted me through an email account that had my true name on it. And so we exchanged a couple emails that way. And then he wanted to do something which we did repeatedly over the course of corresponding, which is to divorce our metadata. In other words, to set up new email accounts that were not connected to the previous ones. And we did that several times over the course of corresponding, because he didn't want there to be sort of a link to my true name or any email address. And so we set up a new email address, and the way that he wanted to verify me is he asked me to tweet my fingerprint and to do it through somebody else. So Michael Lee tweeted my fingerprint, and that's how he verified this new email address. And then we started corresponding. And I don't know how many people in the room are familiar with the Tails operating system, but it's what he had recommended early on in our correspondence to use in order to make it very difficult for any intelligence agency to exploit our communication. And I hadn't actually used it yet. I was based in Berlin. I was pretty familiar with some encryption technologies. I'd been using PGP email, I'd been using OTR chat, and was familiar with some things, but I'd never used Tails. And so when I was in Berlin, I reached out to some people, and somebody recommended a person who actually I'd never met before, and who met me. And he asked me, I think early on in the correspondence, he said, "Who's your adversary?" And I said, "Well, it's the NSA." And he said, "Oh, okay, well, that's a serious adversary." And we had a meeting. And he didn't actually, I still to this day don't know his last name. This is somebody who met me, and he set up a computer for me. And this was a computer that I'd bought with cash. I'd actually bought it in New York when I was actually Jacob Applebaum was visiting me in New York, and I was looking and he recommended that I should have a computer that was, it was hard to trace to me, and we bought this computer, and I hadn't ever used it. And so I figured, as I was, contacting the source, I figured this was a good time to use this computer. So I set up this new computer that I'd never used before, operating a Tails system. And, I thought pretty early on that the source what was going to be legitimate. I had a sort of a gut feeling, and I knew that this was going to be really serious. I mean, that given the the disclosures that were going to be made, given the fact that I was also already on a watch list, that I had to take every precaution that I could to protect our communication and to protect him as a source. And so I started, checking this email address, and I would go to sort of random places where I could, that weren't attached to my home or where I worked, so there wouldn't be a connection between my sort of personal, Wi-Fi account and this computer. And we corresponded over the course of several months. I was very concerned or cautious about the risk of there potentially being some kind of entrapment, and I think that that wasn't an unfounded risk. I mean, I think what's happening right now in the U.S., we have the subpoenaing of the AP, or the targeting of James Risen to get his source, and then in the context of being contacted was also a few months after the story of Sabu came out, the anonymous and low sex member who became an FBI informant and went on this series of trying to entrap people. So I was very aware of that and very cautious to make sure that there was nothing suspicious about our communication, because I thought that there was a risk that it was an elaborate entrapment attempt. And then, we corresponded over several months. I didn't receive any actual documents until right before meeting in Hong Kong. Before we met, Snowden did reveal that he didn't intend to remain anonymous and that he would come forward with his identity. And when he told me that was when I requested that we meet in person, and that I requested that I could film with him. And we had a lengthy exchange. He had concerns about it. He didn't want to be the story, which he's been very consistent as saying. And he also was worried about the risks of us meeting, because he was worried that there was a potential that the reporting could get stopped if anything were to happen. So I had to provide assurances of why I felt it was important for him to articulate his motivations, and then also to provide assurances that if we were to meet, it wouldn't end the reporting. And then I tried in 2013, in mid-May, I traveled to New York. He'd agreed to meet. I had no idea where we were meeting, and nor did I have any documents at that point. But I was pretty convinced that this was legitimate, and but I actually thought that we were going to be meeting someplace in the U.S. And I mean, it wasn't until actually late in May that I learned that we were meeting in Hong Kong. And during this time in New York, I had a lot of meetings, a lot of legal meetings to find out what the risks were. And what I heard repeatedly is that the First Amendment does protect this kind of journalism, but that it's not inconceivable that the U.S. government would use the Espionage Act to target journalists.